Hey everyone, Michelle Sadling here with another episode of Food Experience Unplugged. Today we'll explore how to heal emotional and disordered eating patterns. Here to help us do that is holistic food therapist Sarah Thacker. This podcast is available on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to be informed as new episodes become available. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of our episodes, be sure to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. As always, be sure to check out our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com for some resources as you begin your health journey. Sarah Thacker, welcome to Food Experience Unplugged.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
We are so happy to have you here as a food therapist. So I'm interested to hear all about that. And as we dive into our topic today on emotional and disordered eating patterns and how to heal from that. But to get started, will you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us what brought you to this point in your life and in your career?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm Sarah Thacker, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor in New York, and then also a licensed counselor actually in Virginia. And many years ago, I just have always been interested in food and, been a therapist since 2002. And in 2011, I did the training program at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition and becoming a holistic health counselor, health coach. And so I integrated it into being more of a health counselor at that point, and I was trying to kind of keep them two separate entities. And I just had so many people reaching out that were saying, like, it's not that I don't know what to eat, it's that I had compulsively do this overeating, or I want to lose weight, but I can't seem to because I just have these patterns that I continue to return to no matter what. And so I became very interested in that element of it at that time, and seeing there was a real need for not necessarily, definitely I work with people with full-blown eating disorders as well, but really when you can catch the disordered eating patterns and the emotional eating early on, it can be really effectively managed in so many really healthy, wonderful ways before it becomes a full-blown eating disorder. And certainly once it is, if somebody does have an eating disorder, those can certainly be managed in really helpful ways as well. But tackling the emotional eating is always a big part of the process. And so that's sort of how I landed into it. I'm also a yoga therapist, and so I bring a lot of the holistic elements and mindfulness, meditation, and certainly other ways of learning how to practice mindful eating, intuitive eating practices as well through this work.
I love how you're integrating so many different aspects. You've got the food portion, of course, you've got the therapy, and you've got yoga and meditation as well.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Now, thinking back even, at the very beginning of your career with the food therapy and all of that, what kind of set the spark for you? Why food therapy? Why integrative nutrition and other aspects of your work?
Yeah, I've always just been very fascinated by our body's ability to heal itself, and particularly in relation to food, and wanted to dive into that. And I remember getting even an email from the Integrative Nutrition program. It's like, "Are you passionate about healthy eating?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." And like that whole, it was part of their sales tactics, but it was very effective because I definitely feel that passion. And yet also, I definitely am a full believer in kind of the whole intuitive eating ways as well, and those principles that the dieting way of going all in on one particular way of eating is for most people not effective and isn't sustainable. So while there might be a ton of information about being vegan or about being vegetarian or about being paleo or about being like all of these different things out there, keto and fasting, and it can become confusing and overwhelming, and that in of itself can really increase some of those disordered eating patterns. And so my passion for just kind of food, nutrition, and healthy way of being also, and yoga and things like that, and integrating that with just how much it's also so impacted by the dieting industry, and how that has created for so many women, and particularly a lot of the disordered eating patterns in and of itself. And so the spark sort of just happened when recognizing that need for really what so many people struggle with, which are these patterns that start generally from dieting or some forcing of controlling the body or wanting the body to look a particular way, and then using food to try to control that. And then food becomes both a problem and a solution to the emotional state of feeling deprived or feeling not good enough or whatever it is. And so food is very soothing and grounding and calming. And so people might find themselves in that pattern of restricting and then overeating as a form of self-soothing. And so yeah, the spark kind of just came from recognizing how deep that runs for so many people, and again, in particularly women, and how there's really so many internal resources you can access to begin to heal from that.
I love that. I love that. Just that integrative aspect of the whole eating patterns. Now, when we speak about eating patterns, what exactly you talked about restriction and binging, but what exactly are they, and how prevalent are they?
Yeah, so patterns are anything that you can find yourself turning to food when potentially not hungry or thinking about food or just having particular cravings that are not necessarily based on the body's needs in that moment. And
Mhm.
so they might be things like, again, when you look at it from the emotional side of things, just feeling bored and not knowing what to do. So it's like, well, snacking, that's kind of a nice way to fill the time, or feeling like there's all this stuff to do and it's a great procrastination. Well, I'll just eat a little bit first. And so the eating becomes something to do in those forms. And then when you look at it from other standpoints, like when you're feeling lonely and down, and food can be a friend or a comfort in those moments, that food always can offer some type of relief to an emotional experience that's experienced internally as uncomfortable. And so whenever the uncomfortable emotion sets in of loneliness or feeling down or feeling bored, that food becomes this way of feeling, creating the opposite feeling state potentially, although generally what it does is it just temporarily numbs those feelings and they just will come back. And this is what the pattern becomes, where food is the problem now that it's it's become some this disordered way of using it to calm or numb emotions, and then it's also the solution for when those emotions resurface. And so it becomes a very dangerous pattern really that can lead to more disordered eating or full-blown eating disorders. And generally they have a flavor of that where there's some restricting at some point, like, oh, I ate this, quote unquote bad food, so now I have to restrict. I'm not allowed to eat for this period of time because I was bad, and then now I'll be good again, and you're like, only eat salads or only eat vegetables. And then all of a sudden then the pendulum swings in the opposite direction, where eventually the body is either really hungry and needs to eat, or there's just intense cravings or an emotion sets in, and then all of a sudden you find yourself going back to turning to food to numb those emotions. And then so that's where it can turn into sort of that binging or overeating and restricting pattern that starts to come in. And the pattern also can just be the turning to the food as an emotional outlet, and looking like food might be the only thing to look forward to. So meals are the only excitement of the day or the only pleasurable moments of the day. And so this is how these patterns can kind of set in. And whenever it becomes even further down the disordered pattern line, it can look like things like hiding food, sneaking to eat food, feeling really shameful about eating, um, and then doing other things like, again, leading to those greater binges where it feels like that release needs to happen with the food.
Mm, okay. Now, what does this affect? A large portion of the population, or certain demographics more than others, or what? How prevalent is it really?
Yeah, so generally, disordered eating patterns and eating disorders are going to be, less full blown. Although there's statistically a fairly high portion of young women are now starting to get eating disorders at a much younger age.
Mhm.
But the stress and emotional eating patterns can be dabbled in, so to speak, by everybody, right? It can be where most people can identify with the concept of stress eating, of like feeling
Mhm.
stressed out and just like eating just to kind of calm down. And then it can again kind of extend into other areas. So I would say it's fairly prevalent. And this pandemic, if nothing else, has really highlighted that, where many people are feeling like food has become like the one thing they can control. It's become something that is something to look forward to in the day when we're not doing a lot of the normal things that might bring us joy. Food can be that joyful moment. And it's also something like when we're feeling stressed out and overwhelmed by uncertainty, that it's there as this comfort. And so for many people, have experienced an influx of people who are struggling with it or noticing it as an arising pattern, even if it was just maybe on a small occasional level originally, that it's become a lot more prevalent in day-to-day life for many people during this time that has been excessively stressful for so many.
Yeah, wow, yeah, that is, an unfortunate alternative to everything that's going on, or a reaction, I suppose. It's kind of a little overwhelming, to say the least. Now, how does that affect with these negative eating patterns? How does that balance out with, if you're trying to establish some healthy habits? Where's the balance point in there?
Yeah, so the way that I work is really and encourage is the intuitive eating and mindful eating integration, where really looking at how you start to let your body be the guide in terms of your wants and needs. And our body is tremendously intelligent, and it needs certain nutrients in order to function healthfully and properly. And we really tune in. A lot of people get confused that they'll think like, oh, if I just let myself eat whatever I want or be intuitive about it, then I'll probably just eat like donuts and pizza all day long. And yet if you really think about eating donuts and pizza all day for every meal, like, would your body really feel like if you really sit with that and think about it, would your body feel good? Would you feel confident? Would you feel healthy if that was the pattern you were really taking on? And for most people, the answer is no. And so what ends up happening is we've categorized foods and demonized certain foods to the extent, and particularly again, kind of from this dieting mentality, that there's some foods that are just so bad, they're so off limits that I can't have them. They're just they're like I can't control myself with them or whatever. We have these stories about those foods, and while yes, donuts are not necessarily they don't devoid of nutrients and things like that. That doesn't mean that if you want a donut once in a while that it's the worst thing in the world. In fact, feeling super stressed out about not eating it or wanting it so badly might be more harmful to our health than just letting ourselves eat a donut once in a while, right? And so it's about finding that pattern of what is right for your body and what is right for kind of just maintaining a sense of sanity around food. And for most people also, when we're looking at the intuitive eating, so we're looking at rejecting the dieting mentality, honoring your hunger, recognizing full sensation, really feeling that fullness, being able to move your body in a pleasurable way, gentle nutrition, so really giving your body the nutrients that you know that it needs to function properly on a day-to-day basis, understanding and having an outlet for your emotions so that you're not turning to food for emotional release, and also looking at challenging the food police. So like the people and the parts of ourselves that are always like, oh, this is bad, this is good, blah, blah, and all of that judgment that ends up happening. And then also being able to find what foods are really satisfying. And when we have a sense of feeling satisfied and satiated through food, then generally we're not going to have all of these crazy cravings in terms of just if we're not properly balanced in terms of our nutrition. And then when we're emotionally handling things in a very suitable, useful way, then we're not going to be turning to food in order to cope with our emotions in another way. And so when you're looking at how to create the balance, it's finding one area to start. And so I really encourage people to start with things like one mindful eating practice per day, where you just set aside a time that can be as undistracted as possible. Like I know not every life can be perfectly zen to have this one perfect meal or snack, but even if it's as possible. And I even encourage people like, I just can't do it. It's impossible. Like I've got kids, I've got this other stuff going on and I can't take a break. I'm at my desk all day. Then can the first bite that you take of this meal or this snack be mindful, so that it's about tasting, do I like this food? Is it bringing me a sense of satisfaction? And also, where's the nourishment in it, and how balanced does it feel? So you're really evaluating and giving yourself an opportunity then to notice, how does this food impact my body and my mood state and my energy, so that you can make choices freely about whether or not this food is a good choice for you in the future. And so there are some foods that you might choose. So like, hey, every time I eat a donut, I get a stomach ache. Well, that's a pretty good indicator that this might not be the right way to get in a food that you might find as satisfying or enjoyable or pleasurable. That's a treat of some form. And so how can you let your body tell you these things and then actually listen and take that information and move forward with it in a way that you are in control? And there's a huge difference between saying, I'm not allowed to eat that food, it's bad food, it's off limits, and I choose not to eat that. One is very victim oriented, between like, I just can't have it because I'm just so out of control, that I can't handle that food, versus I choose not to eat it. I know it's not right for my body, or I choose to eat it very seldomly because I know it doesn't make me feel great. And when you do that, that's empowering. So that feels like, oh, this is my choice. And it doesn't come with that same energy of desiring it or having thoughts about it or feeling like you're punishing yourself essentially by not being able to have that particular food. So that's an area of the intuitive eating layers, and then the mindful eating that become in and really help to start to shift just how you view food, and also the stories that you tell yourself about the food. And one of the biggest layers of mindful eating, and is part of that concept of the food police and the intuitive eating process, is that when you judge your food, when you say, this is a bad food that I'm eating, I'm choosing to eat the slice of pizza, it's a bad food. So now I internalize that as I'm a bad person, or there's some shame and guilt behind that decision because I should have known better, or I know how to eat healthier, but I don't make that choice all the time. And so when you're in the, desire to begin to have healthier lifestyle or begin to eat healthfully or whatever that means, saying that pizza's off limits is if you enjoy it and it doesn't cause any physical discomfort in your body, then how do you find the right balance with it? Can you have a slice of pizza and then also enjoy like a nice robust salad or some like good roasted vegetables, and finding a way to create the balance so you know that you're providing your body with the full range of nutrients that it needs while also letting your taste buds have that enjoyment, or sharing in a meal if that's what your family's having or something like that. And so it's about finding balance. It's about really tuning in and listening to your body. And it's about not judging what your choices are. So if you are making this choice in a mindful way to eat pizza, then are you going to judge yourself or create an internalized guilt and shame around it? Because that's only going to necessarily have some backlash. So then the emotions come in of guilt and shame, which are going to trigger negative internal experiences and most likely lead to more emotional eating. So it's just a never ending cycle until we begin to interrupt those cycles and patterns with these new ways of thinking about food, of thinking about choices, but then also thinking about what does a healthy lifestyle really mean? It does not mean perfection. It does not mean restriction. It just means, how do you create the healthy, balanced choices that are right for your body? Not necessarily what's right for your partner's body, your neighbor's body, whatever, but for yours. And you become the expert on that, which is really so much more empowering than any theory that's out there.
Absolutely. That is incredible. I love just balancing. So essentially, you're just kind of reasoning within yourself as to, okay, if you've got a dinner coming up or some other type of food that you're about to eat, you're just reasoning whether you should or shouldn't, and resolving those feelings.
So yeah, so I mean, in the therapy world, we say don't should on yourself because it's not what you should or shouldn't do. It's what do I want? What does my body want and need? And if it really feels like a sound choice for what you're going to be making and you feel good about that choice, just want to notice how balanced is it and why am I making this choice? So you're just reflecting, you're being deeply aware of the choices versus going into a mindless numbing with like, like I've had such a hard long day. I just want to numb out with a bunch of pizza because nothing will calm me down more than cheese and bread, right? And so like it's just very grounding, it makes you feel quite full. And so it definitely has that sensibility. And yet for most people, if you overeat on pizza, it just creates a level of discomfort. So the numbing aside from those emotions, but then it creates other discomfort in the body, other kind of like maybe feeling sick or feeling like sluggish or whatever. And so when you tune in, you're going to know, I don't want to harm my body with that. So how can I deal with this anxiety that I'm feeling or this stress in another way that's healthier? And then I can just go and enjoy a piece of pizza. And also, if that's what I feel comfortable eating tonight, but also making sure I've balanced nutrition with that as well. And it's not restricted. It's not like if I want pizza tomorrow, I can't have it, because that will make you want to overeat on it today. If today's the only day that pizza's allowed, again, and we create that restriction mentality, then probably all bets are off. And it's like, well, forget the vegetables. I'm just going to overdo it on pizza. I'll eat all the vegetables tomorrow. But that mentality of, good, bad, that judgment becomes something that generally it's not healthy. Because again, we internalize that as I'm a bad person for eating this bad food. And likewise, if we're eating the salad, then we feel superior, right? And that's not necessarily not any better or worse. It's just a choice. And so trying to take the judgment out of it and just be with your food. And then when you're just being with it, you're judging it less and you can notice how it makes you feel. And that is what we're really after, is what is the impact? And most people, many people that I work with will find, like, if there's certain things like, oh, but how could I ever stop having like Diet Coke or whatever? And so if they start, weaning off it a bit, or, reducing or making sure they've had adequate amounts of water before enjoying it, they'll often find if they're doing it mindfully, that it doesn't taste that good. Like, it doesn't taste as good as what I think, because it's more about this is a treat, or this is something that I need, or it's the caffeine or whatever it is. But generally, and the same with certain, certain like processed cookies or other things, it's like if you really sit and mindfully eat them, sometimes it's like, oh, that wasn't as good as what I had in my mind, right? Because you think of like, and I don't want to knock any companies or anything, but like something like just kind of the most common cookie, like an Oreo, that it generally is, you might have some, fond memories of eating them, but if you really slow down and eat them, they don't really have, the same taste as maybe a homemade delicious cookie that you might create and enjoy and have the satisfaction from. And so it just is really all about how do you create balance and how do you listen to your body so that your food choices are based intuitively on what your body wants and needs, and what provides a sense of feeling satiated and healthy and satisfied, that then also is not put into some type of box where I'm only allowed to have this food and I can only be perfect, because that becomes its own form of eating disorder called orthorexia, where you become very terrified of things that are, quote unquote, bad foods. And then it becomes an internalized anxiety response to anything that's not, viewed as perfect. And that, again, is just as unhealthy as potentially eating chocolate cake. So it just is really, how do we change the stories around food, really become more grounded in terms of choices, but then also and thinking it through and having it not be this mindless last minute decision about this thing that we're going to put in our body, but really think it through, give it space, and allow a whole other avenue for how to manage emotions and stress, because food generally is just not a healthy way to process emotions. It doesn't work. It just numbs, it just stuffs. It does not actually remove those emotions. It doesn't take the stress out of your life. So when you're balancing how you're eating and those choices, and then also taking care of your emotional world and having healthy outlets. So it's finding, like, if you notice your pattern is boredom, procrastination, from work or thing, or stress and anxiety, what outlets could you create and utilize alternatively to eating that aren't food-based, so that you could have some healthy outlets for these emotions and process them, so that they don't just sit and live inside your body and then have those cravings come for specific foods that inevitably create that feeling, but then also often create guilt and shame.
Mm. So you essentially separate out the food from the emotion?
Yeah, so I really, when I'm working with people, what I do is create this little protocol called the pause, reflect, and release. And so initially, when there's a craving, you want to sit and be able to tune inward and notice, am I hungry? That's the first question. Am I actually hungry when this craving comes? And if the answer is yes, then figuring and determining, what am I actually hungry for? If I'm hungry for, like, I just want to eat the cookies because I know they're there, versus I really, like, my body actually feels fairly hungry. Like, a couple of cookies isn't going to cut it. And then I'll probably just be hungry, in another hour after I eat the cookies. Then how can I nourish my body and still maybe have a cookie, but not feel like that's going to be this snack or this meal? And so it's really determining, when you tune in, am I actually hungry? So if the answer is yes, you try to figure out, what am I really hungry for, and how can I is this what my body truly wants and needs in terms of nourishment and balance? And if it is not, if you're not hungry, then you want to tune in, well, what is this craving about? So then you start reflecting on, what is the emotion that's present? And there's a bunch of wonderful resources on the internet. So you can just Google feelings wheel and get a whole beautiful wheel of all the different emotions that you might be experiencing, because many people struggle with, I don't know how I'm feeling. And so that just gives an identification point. And so then once you access and identify, well, this is how I'm feeling, then you can reflect on, well, what does this emotion want me to know? Why is it here? Our emotions show up as a reflection of our experience in our life. And so if we're feeling a particular emotion, it's for a reason. And if it feels a certain emotion, so let's say anxiety, well, what am I worried about? Like, what is causing this anxious energy that I'm having, that I'm craving this food for? And then, so as you reflect on it, you just are determining, why is this emotion here? What does it want me to know? And then the release phase is, what can I do to potentially resolve this internal emotional experience? Sometimes there's no resolution. It's just sitting with it and acknowledging it, and that allows the experience to begin to settle some. Sometimes it's journaling. Sometimes it can be super helpful if there's a lot of anxiety, then to, like, take a brisk walk or do some type of deep breathing exercise. For some people, meditation is very effective, and other people, it is even more anxiety provoking. So it may not be the go-to, right, for anxiety, but to do when you're more calm, so that it helps grow the ability to handle anxiety long term. But deep breathing and doing some breathing exercises or guided meditation can always be an effective tool in the moment. It might be something like calling a friend and just talking about whatever's on your mind, and having some type of outlet. If you're feeling really bored, it's really, you're desiring some type of stimulation. So can you, like, do some type of creative outlet? What's something that you enjoy doing? Could you tidy up? Like, there's a gazillion things we could potentially do to fill this space of boredom versus eating. And so it's just having some awareness around what helps to release these emotions that's not food based, and then checking back in, and once you've done this pausing, giving yourself a bit of space, reflecting, why is this emotion here, if you are not hungry? And then the release, how do you let go of the emotion or process it so that it's no longer so intense? And then going to the process of reassessing, now, how strong is that craving? What is that experience? For most people, once you've gone through this, the craving has come to a much more manageable rate, if not completely gone. For some people, it still might linger. It might be like, oh man, I still would like that cookie, but I'm not hungry. And I know I'm not. So then there's the plan for, okay, well, how can I allow myself to have that at some point in the future, knowing that it is possible, but I will also plan for my normal, balanced meal or whatever. And so it's just an opportunity to check in. For some people in that reflection phase, they recognize, well, I'm not terribly hungry, but I also could eat something. I am kind of hungry. There's a little bit there, but not terribly. So then it's again checking in with, can I allow myself to eat something that feels like it would help to make me feel balanced? It would create energy and be a healthy, snack, but also not restricting. So if I still want the cookie, but maybe that's just not the only thing that you're going to have. And for some people with things like sugary foods and otherwise, they will be asking for themselves. And so being able to really check in like, oh, I'm craving that because I know they're there, or because I had sugar yesterday, and sometimes it just asks for itself as certain foods can, where it's like, ooh, that just sounds good. And so really tuning in, but is this really what I want and need right now? And so that creates, again, another opportunity to really listen inward and check in with your body so that you become the expert, and then you become the decision maker on how to treat your body, how you want to treat it.
Okay, so does it normally take several iterations of eating a certain food or having a certain meal before that reasoning you're able to resolve that emotional pattern, so to speak?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a process. So the pause, reflect, release that I recommend is something that, the awareness is always the first step to change. And so once you're aware that these emotional patterns exist, then it's, oh no, okay, now I'm aware. So now I've got to do something about it. And that in and of itself can take a while just to wrap your head around. So that awareness phase might take a while before actually moving into action. So then once you've decided, okay, I've got to get a handle on this, I'm moving into some action phase now. So then the action phase of change, we're really looking at how to start to implement this in a way that works. And so it's, for some people, it's having a reminder on your phone. It's before every meal, going through this process, pause, reflect, release. Every craving, getting out the journal, writing it out, like giving yourself space to really channel those emotions and notice how they feel in your body. Because some people are very disconnected from their emotional world. And so it takes a while to even tune in. And so they might find themselves already eating the cookie before they're like, oh wait, I'm having a craving, and that's okay. Like, it's a process. It's not intended to be perfect. It's not intended to be an overnight fix by any stretch of the imagination. For most people, about 3 months in of doing the practice, trying to do consistently one mindful meal or snack a day. And again, if you can't manage a whole meal or snack, the first bite. So just looking at the first bite, can you just chew slowly, enjoy it, taste it, make sure it's something you're actually enjoying? How's it making your body feel? And when you're doing that in just a consistent basis, that opens up the opportunity to practice these things in real time when you're not actually having a craving. And then beginning to integrate it during those cravings. So when you are actually experiencing the craving, reminding yourself, and some people use apps and things like that on their phone, or reminders on the phone to go through it. Some people like just the old-fashioned writing it out and having the card to just be able to look through that process as a reminder to pause and reflect and release, and to give space for these emotions. And that begins to disrupt. So once you begin to disrupt it a little bit with this reflection, and then adding in some new coping strategy, you're shifting the behavioral response. So you're starting to create a new neural pathway in the brain that every time I'm feeling anxious doesn't mean I need to eat. Now I might choose deep breathing. I might choose taking a walk. I might choose to call a friend. And so you're starting to set a new pattern of behavior, but that generally takes several months to really integrate fully until the behavior is totally integrated. For some people too, because if it's gone further into more disordered patterns, it can be much more challenging. And so just not to get frustrated, but to really be patient with yourself and know that sometimes it's the process is slow, because it has been so deeply ingrained, and for some people all the way to childhood, and they're in their 30s, 40s, and finding themselves like just with this deeper awareness, or just with the desire finally to change. And so that, again, it's sort of, where do I start, and then how do I begin to give myself, for one thing, that non-judgment, so not thinking I'm a good or bad person for doing it right or wrong or perfectly or whatever, but to ease into it, to give space to the change, and eventually to really start to map out like what that change process looks like, so they can see the progress happening, even if it's just baby steps or little bits at a time.
So are you seeing a wide spectrum then of various eating patterns? You mentioned if to the extreme, it can turn into other eating disorders.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I work with people anywhere on that full spectrum. So some people who just struggle with some emotional eating and it's, working through some of those patterns and behavior change, up to some people who really struggle with, more intensive binge eating or binge purge patterns, or, otherwise that are in a, classification of an eating disorder. Um, and so, yeah, so what the treatment might look like for someone who's in a full blown eating disorder is very different, where we do, some different therapeutic techniques, and it is recommended they're doing specifically some form of therapy to help work with those disorders to begin to resolve them. However, for somebody who is struggling with some emotional eating patterns, they might be able to disrupt that and work through many of these things on their own, or maybe with a small support, but not necessarily feel like they need consistent therapy to really heal that. So it's a wide
Okay.
spectrum. Yeah. Yeah.
It definitely has, as you might expect. Now, you've worked with so many different people on all of the points in the spectrum. Will you give us some examples of people, how they've resolved that within them, resolved that emotional eating, or got the assistance that they needed?
Yeah, absolutely. For people who feel like they need support with it, and reach out, then it's really a part of the process of just going through these changes, really assessing, like, what does the ultimate goal look like? What is the vision for having a healthy relationship with food? With For many people, that looks like, and this is kind of like like a few clients like all wrapped into one, but the idea of, they're desiring not to have to think about food all the time, where it's on their minds. Is this good? Is this bad? How many calories is this? Or is this the right macros or whatever? And just all of those thoughts about food, and how that actually is stimulating a sense of internalized anxiety already, even just from those thoughts. And so for many people, it's the vision is, I don't want to have to think about food all the time. And I don't want to eat when I'm not hungry and feel like I just turn to food for every single reason. Um, and I want to feel balanced. I just want to feel good in my body. Most people, that's really, a lot of people will seek this type of work because they ultimately want to lose weight. But then when we really dig into it, it's not about the weight. It's really about the ability to feel like there's a sense of empowerment and self-control, and an opportunity to have other alternatives to handle some of these deeply entrenched behaviors. And so really we're look on healing on multiple levels, but particularly getting into that emotional standpoint. And for everybody that I work with, as they start to delve into the emotional world, some that maybe has been off limits for whatever reason, but for many people in childhood, we learn that our emotions are inconvenient, or they are, too much or whatever. And so then I start just internalizing that, oh, well, if I'm having this feeling, it must not be right. If, like a parent or a teacher or whoever else isn't really attending to it. And then as a child, you don't know how to handle or process those feelings. And so then they just become internalized. So many people find, oh, a lot of this really stems from deeper into childhood, and just not having any language or opportunity to have a space for emotions to be freely expressed and explored. And so once they start opening that up and delving into that internal world, it's a really whole new language with themselves. And so for everybody that I work with, that tends to be definitely one of the most impactful arenas, is really just feeling more complete by having this access and understanding of the emotions. And a lot of times we categorize things as negative or positive, and like, well, angry is negative or whatever. And so, but really we look at it as, it's not good or bad, it's just an emotion. It's, again, we don't judge that it's an emotion. It's part of being a human, that sometimes anger is going to show up. What is the message? So that's really what we're looking for. And when you can determine, oh, well, anger says I'm not okay with how I'm being treated, that's really valuable. That's not a negative experience. That is a very positive experience. It's how do we respond to that emotion, that is what we could be viewing as good or bad. So if I yell, or if I, throw something because I'm angry, well, yeah, that's not necessarily a healthy response to that emotion, but the emotion itself is not a negative experience. It's just maybe uncomfortable because you don't know what to do with it, but it's definitely not a bad thing. And so when we can really begin to comb through, like, what is the message of the emotion, it loses that potency of being negative, and you can begin to determine, okay, what can I do about it? What can I offer this emotion? What is an opposite emotional experience I'm working towards that might feel more comfortable, but also allow a release of this anger in a healthy way? And so that might be setting boundaries. It might be being able to stand up for yourself. So it offers all of these other things that for so many people, those internalized emotions are part of that. Like, because if you don't stand up for yourself and you're angry, and then you end up, so it becomes these other patterns of ineffectively handling emotions. And so having the ability to do that effectively is really empowering.
Okay. So do you find in your work that, after as you're resolving or understanding all these emotions, Are there other types of coaches or other assistants that those people need in tandem with your food therapy?
Sure, I think more hands on deck, the better, depending on what people are after. As a therapist, I'm primarily working therapeutically with people, and we talk about food, and we can talk about different tools. Like I recommend planning and meal preparation, and that so it's one less thing you have to think about during the week. It's like, oh, I've already pre-thought. What do I want to eat? It's the idea, like if you pack your lunch, it's probably going to be a healthier, more balanced meal than if you're doing takeout. That same idea is like, well, what's quick and easy usually isn't going to be the healthiest option. And yet when we pre-think it and we're planning ahead. So these kinds of opportunities to pre-plan and whatever. And so for some people, having like a dietitian or a health coach specifically, or some other form of coaching, can really help with some of those ins and outs if it feels like they really want more support around some of the layers of how to make those meal plans and preps work for them. And so for some people, they find having another coach is really useful. Some people are really feeling the sense of overwhelm or anxiety around like job stuff or other layers of life. And so absolutely bringing on a coach that specializes in, career transitions or other things can be really helpful, especially if we're working on, really getting into deep emotional intelligence or another form of therapy that we might be doing that's taking up the bulk of the therapy time. Then having that additional coaching support can always be super helpful.
Oh, that's fantastic. How getting to the root cause and then, addressing if, other services are needed or how to go about that.
Absolutely.
So when is there a point where someone can say, okay, I have overcome this negative eating pattern? Or is it kind of always lingering in the back of your mind, so to speak?
For many people, and I think this is true with anybody who doesn't naturally do anything, right? So like as an example, like I am not like exercise. I enjoy it when I'm doing it and all that good stuff, but it is not something that I wake up and like, man, I just feel like like doing a workout right now. Like I want to sit on the couch and drink tea and relax or whatever. And so the same for me, and exercise is valuable to me, and I know the benefits, and so I choose to make it a part of my life, but it is something that I have to work at on a daily basis. That motivation isn't just going to magically show up unless I provide it for myself. The same with I think healthy eating patterns and emotional and staying on top of emotional eating. It is so easy to fall back into old patterns for every human being. And I think once you've gotten it down pat for like a year, a couple, and you really feel like this is ingrained, this is my new way of being, then you may need less, but there's still some of that self accountability, that check-ins, setting new goals. All of that is super helpful because we're never done with self improvement and with becoming the best versions of ourselves. It is a constant work in progress to be our best self. And so that's always what I encourage, is just like staying on top of it, having check-ins for yourself, self accountability, or working with a coach continually, or continuing with therapy on a monthly basis or whatever, can be really helpful post kind of like healing, so that we get to the place where there is still an opportunity to say, like, I know I have this check-in coming. So it's another layer of accountability and internalized motivation to maintain, because again, things can come back, and for many people, big life changes or big events can trigger like, oh, like there I go again with that old emotional eating pattern, because there's you know it's kind of like the same idea with somebody who drinks or something. Like there's nothing as powerful as necessarily the feeling of being drinking for someone who struggles with alcohol, and yet knowing like the sobriety layers feel so good, and that like it might be the first thing they want, like with a big life changer, a big stressor. And so that the same idea that we can kind of come back to those old patterns when it was so effective in terms of how we coped for a long period of time. And the same with food. And not that food and alcohol are the same, because we have to eat, we have to be around food. It's part of our social and our culture life. And so it definitely can't be avoided. And so it's how do you stay connected to what is best for what your body wants and needs, and staying away from the dieting mentality, but really tuning into what is right for me, what is right for my body, and how do I consistently allow myself to create that balance and to stay on top of it. Because again, I think we all have the tendency to fall back into old patterns super easily if given even one chance. It's human nature. And so so definitely, even though healing happens and is possible, and I see it all the time, it's just maintaining the sense of self accountability or some form of accountability to maintain for an extended period is really valuable.
Okay, I love that. I love that. The accountability piece and really just reflecting, the constant reevaluation of the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, for those who maybe you've just started a negative eating pattern or maybe you've been struggling, what are some steps that people can take to really address it and get to the root cause?
Yeah, I think that first step is just allowing yourself a space to have the one mindful meal or snack a day where there's an opportunity to just be present with your food and evaluate how does this food impact, how I'm feeling physically, emotionally, energetically, and how hungry do I feel after that. So you're really just being curious in that mindful eating space. And then the most important part of that is to do eat whatever you're choosing to eat in that meal or snack with non-judgment. That's the kicker. And then being able to do that, so practicing that consistently and then practicing that pause, reflect, and release, where you're giving yourself space before the mindful eating to go through that just as a practice. It gets your mind in this rehearsal of it so that by the time you're faced with a craving and you notice yourself in an emotional pattern, you have a resource to turn to. You can pause for a moment, whether that's turning on a timer for 5 minutes and just say, I'm not going to eat for this 5 minutes and just give that pause. Drinking a glass of water, taking a walk, and giving yourself an opportunity to just not eat in that moment and assess, am I actually hungry? And if I'm not, can I look at what is going on? What is the emotion there? Why do I want to eat right now if I'm not hungry? What is the driver of that? And when you can start to get more and more into those layers, even if it's initially just identifying the emotion, even if you don't do anything with it at that point, you're not ready for that, that's okay. It's just starting that process of beginning to look inward and to begin to become the expert on your own experience and your own needs.
I love that. Becoming the expert on your own experience. That's fantastic and
Yeah.
really, really reflective of that whole iteration of just understanding your emotions.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Mhm. Now, Sarah, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I am in New York and in Virginia. I'm licensed, so those are the only states, people who live in those states, that I can work with on a therapy basis. However, I do have a website. My website is holisticfoodtherapy.com, and the holistic is with a WH because it's for whole foods and whole person. That whole concept. And then also work very much from a holistic standpoint. So that's the website. And I have a book called Holistic Food Therapy also, which is available on Amazon or Barnes and Noble and .com. And that is a workbook, and it's like an expressive journal. So there's opportunities to do a lot of reflecting in it, some art making in it if you're into that, and just a place to kind of hold that journey for yourself. So it's a really nice outlet for people, particularly who might be in that emotional eating phase of not really sure where to start or what to do. It gives some very specific tools for managing it. And then I also provide an online course called Freedom from Emotional Eating, and that's available on my website. And it's just 10 modules of walking through mindful approach to really how to make peace with food once and for all. And it's available on my website. And I also have just an email list. So if anyone's interested in just receiving, like, I do a blog post weekly and just, some resources and things like that. So that's available as well on my website.
Okay, wonderful. We will include all of that in the show notes.
Great. Thank you.
Sarah, it's been amazing talking with you and just really understanding, getting to the heart of the eating patterns and making sense of it all.
Thank you. It's been really wonderful to be here to talk with you today. I appreciate it.